This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that has ever happened to me, and I never have been so petrified in all my life. To this day, I still don't know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he is still where I saw him. I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is, but I just want everyone to understand how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it wasn't for my parents. So I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting uni. Our family home is just outside of a small town, which is surrounded with forests. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child, and I knew the forests there well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles' walk, at which point the stream was hidden quite deeply into the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone, or with my dad over the span of 18 years, and never once saw anybody else in the forest. I went there twice that summer, and both times alone, or so I thought. The first time was a morning. I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest, and I arrived at the stream after an hour or so. As I was enjoying running my hands through the water, I heard a bell from far away coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well and wondered if it was a lost hunting dog or something, and I started moving towards the sound. I know, I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so what the hell. I eventually realized it couldn't have been an animal. The bell was too heavy sounding to be on a collar. I kept moving and the bell was beginning to move away from me, and after 5 minutes it stopped completely. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell that could have been enclosed in a tin or something either, and the river was far too still. I thought of everything that it could have been, but nothing explained the sound, except for one obvious thing, which I didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. It had to have been a person. I stopped thinking about it and just carried on my way, until I found a badger. A dead one, that seemed to have been carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife, and it was fairly fresh as the body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots already, but I knew that happened soon after exposure to the elements. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, and so had I. So, the badger was purposely put there, maybe killed there, and at least decapitated while I was walking that way. I think. I don't really know. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened that day. Then 1 week later I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at around 6 p.m. I made it to the stream, then walked to the river within an hour, then decided to go back the way I came, because it was getting late and it was starting to rain quite heavily. The sun set around 9 p.m, and I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud, and I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest, when I bumped into something heavy. The smell hit me immediately, and it was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with its head strung to its front paws. The area looked a bit like ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree. It was this putrid bag of wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. It was repulsive. At first I just stared at it slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was being drenched in its juices. I was soaked from the rain, so my senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I'd walked the same way to get to the river. So someone had strung up the body after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone knew I'd see it. So was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of the branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad whilst I ran, and told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turned west, as it was the closest part of the path to me, and to come as fast as he could, because someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I'd just disposed of my intestines and stomach, and I literally felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, despite being soaked. It was now dark, and I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away, too far to feel safe. It was still raining, so every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before, and the bell went on for way longer than the last time. On and off, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing, and the fact that I couldn't breathe properly was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a horse and coughing my lungs up, crying out loud like a toddler does, and tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mum, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mum was screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path, and that I needed to run. My dad had gotten out of the car and was heading east from the path. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half-running, half-speed walking thing again, because I was out of breath. Then suddenly I heard branches break, and clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell began to ring louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder, and that's when I saw what was in the forest with me. It was a tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could, that I was on the phone with the police and they were on the path. I shouted, "Dad, I can see you, I'm here." I wanted to yell, "Dad, please, where are you?" but I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen right then. I felt like the man was right behind me, and I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck, and then switched off. I just ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home, and things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name and knew he was coming my way. I could tell he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other. My dad then heard the bell too, and my mum could hear it on the phone. She was waiting in the car, ready to leave fast. We went directly to the police station, and I got medical attention soon after. My dad burst into tears in the car, said he could hear the bell, and thought he wouldn't be able to see me. Asked what if I didn't have my phone, what if he hadn't picked up. They were almost as terrified as me, because they witnessed everything through the call. They could hear me trying to run, and they could hear the danger. They just couldn't see it. The police couldn't really do much. They searched the area, and the only thing they found was a folded t-shirt placed under a rock. I didn't really question that at the time. And my bag was not recovered. They said it was probably some homeless man living in the forest, but they failed to realize what could have happened if my dad hadn't known that part of the forest like I did, and where to find me. I'm not blaming anyone. The entire thing was my fault. It's just there were so many what-ifs. I want to believe it was just someone who decided to live in the woods and hunt or something. Maybe they were a bit mentally unstable and they felt angry that I'd come into their territory. But what if it was more insidious? The way he moved towards me was abnormal and was perverse because of how slowly he was ringing the bell. It's like he had me trapped. I didn't see any more detail. I just ran. To this day, I can't go anywhere where I'll be alone, and the sound of bells is a real problem. The smell of moss as well. Anyway, my parents and Steve Jobs saved my life, so hug yours now and take decapitated badgers and bells as pagan signs that you're unwelcome. About 5 years ago, I was volunteering in a listening service that was only aimed at helping children up to 18 years of age. A lot of training was required for this role, even though it was an anonymous phone service, but if a child presented you with a dangerous situation and we had their permission, then we could call the appropriate authorities, i.e. the police or social services. After a few weeks, I was feeling settled in, and I had taken many calls. The majority were just kids joking around, but there were many tough calls too. Most evenings after I had finished my shift, I would feel so overcome with emotion that I would fight back tears on the way home in my car. Having a small child of my own often made it harder to deal with. One phone call in particular really startled me, and to this day I often think of it. It was about 9:45 p.m, 15 minutes before my shift ended, and I was just sitting around. I hadn't taken a call for over an hour, and time seemed to be moving slowly. Then my phone rang. A petite, soft female voice says, "Hello?" I introduced myself, giving a fake name, as I always do, and I told her a little bit about the service and about what we do, and what we would do if someone was in danger. She said almost immediately, "I need help. I'm babysitting my younger sister. She's only 2 months old and I'm 9. She's diabetic and she's turning blue. My mother and father are gone out. Please help." I felt as though all my training had gone out of the window. I was panicking but tried my best to keep my thoughts clear and my voice clear. "Go outside and get help. Go and knock at a neighbour's house and call the nearest adult you see," I insisted. The little girl talked me through her steps and said she had the baby in her arms and was out in the street. Listening to the noise of the traffic and sound of the night air, my heart was beating so fast, aching to know what was going on and feeling so helpless. I could hear the little girl speaking to someone, but I couldn't make out what was being said. Next, a lady came onto the phone. "I have them. Hello, I have them both. I'm going to take them to the nearest hospital." I thanked the lady and she told me that help was on the way. I ended the call, and once I'd gathered myself, I informed my supervisor. She was as shocked as I was when I gave her all the details. She called the hospital in the area that the girl had given me, and she also called the police. After an hour of filling in the mandatory document, my supervisor followed up the inquiry about the call we had received, and they said they had no such cases. Finding it quite strange, we finished off writing the notes and shut down for the night. My next shift wasn't until the following week, which I was grateful for as I needed the time off. When I returned after my week off, my supervisor called me into her office and informed that she had gone through my notes on the call that I had received that night and had searched the system for similar scenarios and keywords. She told me that every caller has a profile, and that the girl who had called was a frequent caller, and that she wasn't a little girl, but a lady in her early 30s in a psychiatric hospital, and she liked to pose as different people, but mostly as a child. This totally creeped me out, considering the nature of the service and the fact that an adult was abusing it. This information angered me and also disturbed me. I felt silly and naive, as I'd believed this girl's story. Over the next few months, she called a few more times under different descriptions, and always posing as a vulnerable person. I wasn't there for much longer, but that story always gives me the creeps when I think of it. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country, celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks and ended up meeting two guys. Let's call them Andrew and Billy. They seemed like they were really cool, and we were into them. So when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the room, there were two other men there as well. Let's call them Ricky and JD, and they were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said they were their colleagues, as they were in the city for work, and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he was sharing with Ricky. I got a little bit too drunk, and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing, I know. So I'd been in the bed for a while with Andrew, just talking and chilling, when he said, "I just have to pop out and I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out of the bedroom, not out of the actual hotel room. But he left the room to get something from Billy's room. I was just watching TV in the bed when the bedroom door opens, and I assumed it was just Andrew coming back. But my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Bearing in mind I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with the blanket, and he said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you." He then continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and then for some reason he just got up and left. Relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That was until I heard JD, another random colleague, shouting, "Get the fuck back in there. What are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get back in there and do what we were meant to do. Who gives a fuck about that whore? Just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I'd have to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was so terrified I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do. All I did know was that I had to escape. I decided my only option was to just leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to get pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and grabbed my shoes, opened the door, and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the main room door. JD said, "Hey sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come and join us. Come here right now." I said, "No thanks," and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel, in a random city, with no way to contact my friend. So I thought my best option was to go to the lobby and just wait. As I was walking I heard two men yelling down the hall. "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely terrified by this point, and I began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor, and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turn off to the elevator, so I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hallway. I eventually found the elevator and got in, and I could hear their voices getting louder and louder. I didn't want to imagine what would have happened if they'd gotten into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime, and I thought I could just go down to the lobby and safely wait there, because at least there would be people. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight, not a soul. I sat on a couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. Then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what had just happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues had done that. He took me to where my best friend was, and everything turned out fine, but it could have been so much worse. "5 years ago, when I was 18, I was really hurting. My long-term boyfriend had cheated on me, and he loved her more than he loved me. It drove me wild, and I started to act pretty recklessly. I was talking to a lot of people on obscure social media websites, and one guy, Jack, seemed really sweet and was from my area. We started texting, and it seemed like we had a lot in common. New Year's Eve came around, and I didn't have any plans and didn't want to be alone, so Jack suggested we could meet up at a hotel and party together. I decided to meet up with him, and one of the first things he did was ask me if I really was 18. I didn't think it was odd, because I do look extremely young, and people pretty much ask me on a daily basis. I worked in retail, and customers literally would ask me if I was old enough to even work there. So I thought it was a reasonable question. He even made me show him his driver's license to prove I was of age. I did, and then asked to see his in return. He flashed it so briefly that I only saw one thing: the year he was born, 1983. I spent like 5 whole minutes pretending to act normally while secretly processing this. Jack was 32. Quickly I felt bad vibes from Jack. I hung out with him only 2 more times before realizing that he was twisted. He didn't have a car. He lived with his mum, and I wasn't allowed over. He would insult his mum and referred to her as a bitch. He talked about how much he hated cops and was generally vulgar and obscene, and it grossed me out. One time, we went to a concert. He tried putting his hands up my shirt and down my pants while I was talking to someone there. He also took me to a storage unit he owned so we could hang out, as we couldn't go to his place. Inside the unit there was only an air mattress and a container on the ground that he peed in. After that I completely ghosted him, but didn't block him. Everyone asked me why I didn't block him, and I always said, because if he ever texts me that he wants to hurt me or find me, or threatens me in any way, I want to receive that text and have a record of it, instead of have it go into the void unseen. From then on, he texted me every couple of months for 1.5 years, and it was always totally delusional, psycho stuff. Happy 4th of July, wish you could be here with me. You're just a stupid slut with no brain. I'm crying, imagining the beautiful life we could have together. Then it became, I'm so sorry, please talk to me, etc. He left me voicemails describing disgusting sexual things he wanted to do with me. One day I swore I'd seen him at the store that I worked at. I felt a little scared and hid in the back room for a bit. I thought I was seeing things. Then it happened again a few months later, and I was sure it was him, but thankfully he didn't see me. A few days later, one of my co-workers told me that someone named Jack had come looking for me, but I wasn't there. They told him I wasn't in that day. He'd asked for my schedule, but they said they didn't have it. And that's when the terror hit me and the reality set in that I was not safe. I went with my friend to buy pepper spray that day, and on the way there my friend asked if I've ever Googled Jack. I said it hadn't occurred to me to, so I did it right then and there, and a bunch of articles came up that described how he'd sexually harassed, threatened, and assaulted women. He had a serious record including strangulation, slashing tires on cop cars, all kinds of assault and battery, breach of peace and trespassing. There were news articles about him sending sexually explicit pictures to underage girls. There were mugshots of him, and seeing them online was another reality check. That night I was back in bed at home with my parents when there was someone at the door. My stepmom went to answer him. "Someone named Jack is here for you," she said. She was confused. I immediately panicked and told her everything, so she told him I wasn't there and he left. I finally called the police, and saving every text and voicemail from him came in handy because I emailed it all to the officer handling my case. He responded that he was deeply disturbed by the voicemails and that apparently the case was severely more sinister than I let on with the police in person. I came in and gave statements, and they put out a warrant for Jack's arrest, and I got a full no-contact protective order against him. During the month and a half it took them to find Jack, he'd visited my work one more time. The security cameras got it all on tape, as he walked around the entire store, every department and every aisle. Jack also came to my house one more time. I was laying outside in the pool in the backyard when my stepmom came out to tell me she was leaving for work and that I'd be home alone. Once she'd left, just a few minutes later, I heard a commotion in the driveway and my stepmom yelling. I hear her scream, "Get inside right now and call 911. And that's when I knew Jack was there. I instantly jumped off the floating bed I was on, swam like I'd never swam before, bolted up the stairs into the house through the back door, locked it, ran to the front door and locked that too, then ran into my room and hid in my closet. And I did it all with crazy speed that I had no idea was in me. I remember that once hidden I could hear my heartbeat, my crazy breathing, and the water dripping all over the hardwood floor as I hadn't gotten a towel. When my stepmom came in, she told me on her way to work she saw a car that looked like the one Jack had when he came to see me the other time. And on a hunch she turned around to follow him, and he ended up here. It completely blows my mind. If she hadn't have noticed his car, made the connection, feel that slight gut feeling and turn around and risk her job, I don't know what would have happened to me. That was my last encounter with Jack. I haven't heard from him since. I'm still constantly in fear. He is now awaiting a criminal trial. My friend Sally has had a bad run with neighbours, but this one in particular is the worst. Sally lives very close to me, about a 10-minute walk, and we were both around 14 years old when this happened. We live in a rural area, so we both have a lot of land. Sally and I once decided to go camping on her land. We bought cheap hammocks and went through the bush, and the days prior to this we spent clearing some of the razor grass with a cane knife to make a path. We probably should have worn long pants though, because we ended up with little cuts all over our legs and some on our arms. We set up our hammocks and brought quite a few blankets because it gets pretty cold at night, even though you sweat so much throughout the day. Her neighbours had just leased their land to some new tenants, so we made sure not to get too close to the neighbour's boundary. So Sally and I were sitting in our hammocks, talking and laughing, and this was around 9 p.m. Suddenly we heard something in the bush. We just thought it was a wallaby, as there's plenty of those around. But it wasn't. We could see the figure of a man. We were whispering to each other, trying to see and figure out who it was. At first we thought it was her brother, as he'd come out to try and scare us before whilst camping. But then as the person got closer, we thought it could have been her dad. It was dark, and the bush looks the same from every angle. It was a little disorientating, but then we realised that the man was coming from the opposite direction of her house. We didn't dare move at this point and covered our torches under our blankets. The man came up and said hi as he introduced himself as Ben. Ben was extremely drunk. He staggered around and reeked of alcohol. He started saying how we had a nice little camp here and followed it with something pretty unsettling. I'll have to come out and sunbake naked here on one of these hammocks. Me and Sally gave each other a worried look, but didn't say a word. It only got worse from there. I can't remember everything he'd said because it was a while ago, and he was mumbling on for what felt like forever. But some of the things that stuck out were, "I'll have to kill yez Wolf Creek style. You're nearly legal then." He asked us our age. Ben looked to be in his 40s. Me and Sally were texting each other while he was talking and trying to come up with an escape plan. He also offered us a puff on the magic dragon and pulled out a glass pipe. We declined. Sally said that we were leaving to go back to the house to make some food. He told us to come back. We left our blankets and most of the stuff there and legged it. We told her dad what had happened, and needless to say that we slept inside that night. The next morning we went back to our campsite to find everything burnt. A circle with probably a 20-meter radius was all burned out, and coming from that circle was a line of burnt grass that was going towards the neighbour's house. Now, I'm not a firefighter or do forensics, but it seemed obvious that some kind of fuel was used. Me and Sally were talking, and it dawned on us the possibility that Ben may have thought that we were in the hammocks due to the pile of blankets. Ben was definitely drunk enough not to be able to tell the difference. We went and told Sally's dad, who then went to the neighbours to check it out. Ben's roommate answered the door and said Ben wasn't home and apologised, and even gave Sally's dad $50 for the blankets and hammocks. Nothing more happened for a few months, but Sally had told me at school about how Ben had been caught on camera, sneaking around her yard. I went to her house after school because she was going to be home alone until her dad finished work, so I ended up sleeping over there that night, and that's when he came over. Ben was drunk again and came out to the front of Sally's house and started yelling, accusing Sally of stealing his dog. Sally's dad called the police and they arrested him. The next day we found a knife in the yard, and it wasn't from Sally's house. The police came again and we told them about the knife. They got footage from the cameras as well. I don't know what happened to Ben, but he no longer lives next to Sally. One night I was in bed with my boyfriend, and it was about 1:30 a.m. I received a text from a random number saying, "Is this Laura? Sorry for messaging late and out of the blue like this, but I don't think Tom, my boyfriend, is being honest with me, and I need to talk to you." We exchanged a few texts, and basically they were accusing my boyfriend of cheating on the both of us. Obviously I was annoyed, but bear in mind it was June 2020. Bang in the middle of coronavirus lockdown. We'd spent every day together since March. He denied it all and insisted he didn't know who this person was. The same number started texting him with angry texts, calling him a lying rat, etc. Things weren't looking good for him. But this is where it gets weird. This person gave no specifics. They won't tell me their name, what my boyfriend has done, and only that he was a liar and I was an idiot for believing him. I'd ask questions, but they would just reply with vague, angry texts. Their grammar and spelling wasn't good either, but they'd used slang words from our local area. We assumed maybe it was some kids who'd found our numbers off Facebook and were having a laugh, so we just tried to ignore it. Then nothing. Until my boyfriend gets a text the following afternoon, asking him to meet them at a local social club for some company. My friend and I got straight into the car and went down there. No one was there and the club was closed because of COVID, but we couldn't help feel like we were being watched. It was really weird. A few days go by and the same number started texting me again. This time the text language is all weird. There were spelling mistakes, and they'd write "why you too" instead of "you too," that kind of thing. It felt like it was a completely different person texting me. They seemed a lot angrier with me now too, because I didn't believe them straight away. Then they text me, "You're so dull. I see him leaving your house earlier, LMAO." Feeling cocky, I returned a message saying, "Funny that. Where's my house then?" They then promptly replied with my street name. They also knew things about us, like the fact that he was in the army. but to be honest, you could have figured that out from his social media photos. I called this number many times, but it would just ring twice and cut off. I tried searching the number on WhatsApp and on a few social media sites, but found nothing. Only on Instagram the number would come up with a location of a film company in Raalte, Netherlands. I'd googled the number and its provider was Tismi. I've never heard of it, but looks like it might just be a fake number. They've never asked for any money or anything like that either. I don't get why someone would go through that much effort just to wind us up. The last text I had was, "Okay, you will see eventually. LMAO. Creepy. Any advice is welcome." Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. I hope you're all having a crazy spooky Halloween. And if you'd like to support my channel further, you can join my Patreon for just $1 a month. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.